If this breaks, the fallout won't stay contained. Trump military intervention was sold as strength, but strength isn't free, and it never comes with instructions. When the U.S. detained a sitting president abroad, it wasn't just a flex of power. It quietly rewrote assumptions about borders, sovereignty, and restraint. That kind of shift doesn't stay on cable news. It shows up in prices, markets, and security. And whether people like Trump or hate him, they're already paying for the consequences. The surface story is simple. Trump acts tough, America wins, threats disappear. But geopolitics doesn't work like a light switch. It works like stress fractures in concrete. Each intervention weakens norms that once slowed escalation. Energy markets jitter, allies hedge, rivals test boundaries. It looks stable, right up until it isn't. By the end of this video, you'll understand where Trump is most likely to act and where he isn't. You'll see how doctrines, geography, and political incentives shape real decisions. More importantly, you'll know how these choices affect inflation, jobs, and security at home. This isn't about predictions, it's about reading the pattern. Stay until the end, because the final question might flip how you think about American power entirely. Chapter 1. The Venezuela Precedent. Most people woke up one morning and barely noticed it happened, but the rules quietly changed. For the first time in modern history, U.S. forces detained a sitting foreign president and flew him to face trial in the United States. The Maduro capture wasn't just another headline, it was a shock to the global system. This wasn't a war declaration, and it wasn't a coup backed from the shadows either. So the uncomfortable question is this: if it happened once, what stops it from happening again? The operation was justified under Trump military intervention logic, drug trafficking charges, national security risks, and the claim that Venezuela had become a criminal state. From Washington's view, this fit neatly into Trump foreign policy, where law enforcement, military force, and geopolitics blur together. But critics argue the legal reasoning stretched international law to its breaking point, especially when U.S. intervention abroad bypasses global courts. Venezuela's oil, plus its ties to China and Russia, made the move feel less surgical and more strategic. Think of it like repossessing a house because the owner missed payments, except the house is a country. Here's why this matters to you right now. Oil prices, inflation, and market volatility react instantly to moves like this. When America interventionism feels unpredictable, energy traders bake risk into prices you see at the pump. This moment also signaled a shift in Trump geopolitics. Power first, permission later. It told allies and rivals alike that U.S. global power could be exercised faster than diplomacy can react. But the real danger is what happens when this playbook gets reused somewhere far bigger. Chapter 2. The Monroe Doctrine and the Monroe Doctrine. Most people think old doctrines belong in history books, but this one never left. Back in 1823, the U.S. drew a line in the sand and told Europe to stay out of the Americas. That idea, later known as the Monroe Doctrine explained, was simple. This hemisphere is our business. Fast forward 2 centuries, and the logic quietly resurfaced with sharper edges. So the real question is, did the doctrine evolve, or did it just lose its disguise? Under Trump foreign policy, officials openly revived this thinking, rebranding it as the so-called Monroe Doctrine. The message was clear. U.S. Latin America policy would no longer wait for consensus or international approval. This framework made U.S. intervention abroad feel defensive rather than aggressive, even when unilateral. Supporters argue it protects borders, supply chains, and energy security close to home. Critics counter that it's like a landlord changing the locks without warning and calling it maintenance. Why should you care? Because doctrines shape decisions that ripple into jobs, inflation, and regional stability. When America interventionism increases nearby, markets price in political risk across the hemisphere. It also lowers the threshold for action, military, economic, or covert, under the banner of hemispheric defense. Books like The Tragedy of Great Power Politics by John Mearsheimer help explain why spheres of influence always escalate. But once a doctrine justifies action close to home, the temptation to push it further grows fast. Chapter 3. Greenland, the Arctic Ambition. It sounded like a joke at first, until it didn't. In 2019, Trump openly floated the idea of buying Greenland, and most people laughed it off. But geopolitics isn't stand-up comedy, and punchlines tend to age badly. What looked absurd on social media was deadly serious in strategy rooms. So why would a frozen island suddenly matter so much? Greenland sits at the crossroads of Arctic shipping lanes, rare earth minerals, and military positioning against rivals. As ice melts, routes that once took weeks could cut shipping time and costs dramatically. That affects global supply chains, commodity prices, and inflation back home. Under Trump geopolitics, control isn't about flags, it's about leverage over future trade. Think of it like buying land next to a highway before anyone else realizes it's coming. Military action here is extremely unlikely, especially involving NATO allies. But diplomatic pressure, security deals, and economic leverage still move the board, quietly. For investors, Arctic logistics, rare earths, and defense infrastructure become long-term themes. Books like Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall explain why maps dictate ambition. Still, as competition intensifies, miscalculation becomes easier and more expensive. Chapter 4. Iran, the long-standing adversary. If there's one place where a single decision could light up the global economy overnight, it's Iran. This isn't a new rivalry, it's a pressure cooker that's been hissing for decades. When Trump walked away from the nuclear deal, the warning lights started flashing again. Unlike Venezuela or Greenland, this isn't symbolic. This is the kind of conflict that hits your wallet before it hits the news. Trump's exit from the nuclear deal and the Soleimani strike showed how far Trump military intervention could go. Iran responded indirectly: proxy attacks, cyber operations, and nuclear acceleration. Any escalation near major oil choke points threatens global supply instantly. Energy prices spike, airlines adjust routes, inflation creeps upward. It's like blocking a main artery. Everything downstream starts failing fast. A full invasion is unlikely, but targeted strikes remain very real. Allies push restraint, while others push urgency, pulling Washington in different directions. For everyday people, this means volatile fuel prices and rising costs. Energy exposure and defense sectors often act as hedges during Middle East tension. But limited strikes have a habit of pulling in far bigger players. Chapter 5. Cuba and Mexico, the nearby flashpoints. Sometimes the most dangerous sparks aren't overseas, they're right next door. Cuba and Mexico are close enough that instability travels fast. Under Trump geopolitics, proximity turns problems into priorities. Old grudges resurface quickly when pressure builds nearby, and patience is rarely America's strongest instinct. With Cuba, Trump reversed détente, tightening sanctions and reopening Cold War wounds. A humanitarian collapse or refugee surge could revive arguments for intervention. Mexico is even more explosive: cartels labeled as terrorists, fentanyl framed as national security. That rhetoric edges towards U.S. intervention abroad, justified as self-defense. It's like threatening to flood your neighbor's house to stop smoke coming over the fence. Mexico is one of America's biggest trade partners. Any disruption hits jobs and prices fast. Limited cross-border actions have precedent, but escalation would trigger backlash. Markets hate instability at borders more than distant wars. Books like Border Wars explain why power gets tested hardest at edges. Once force becomes normalized nearby, escalation gets easier to sell. Chapter 6. Patterns, Probability, and Predictions. Trump doesn't follow a rulebook. He checks what wins today. Threats come fast. Decisions come suddenly. Hesitation is treated as weakness. That unpredictability defines Trump foreign policy. The real question isn't if he acts, but when it pays politically. And that's what makes allies nervous. The pattern favors targeted operations over full invasions. They're cheaper, faster, and easier to sell domestically. Public opinion, military readiness, and economic costs still act as guardrails. Markets react instantly. Energy spikes, defense rallies, inflation fears creep upward. It's like using a credit card, useful now, painful later.
The future likely means pressure points, not occupation. That keeps U.S. global power visible without long wars. Advisors shape restraint or escalation behind the scenes. Understanding the pattern helps viewers read headlines before markets move. But miscalculation, not intent, is what usually starts the next crisis. This isn't history, it's an ongoing playbook. Understanding Trump geopolitics helps you anticipate shocks before they hit prices and markets. It explains why energy, defense, and currency moves feel sudden. Geopolitics is no longer background noise, it's an input. Ignoring it is like driving without checking the weather. Outcomes aren't fixed, even when power looks absolute. Public pressure, economic costs, and alliances still matter. Staying informed helps separate noise from real signals. Read broadly, follow energy and trade routes, question simple narratives. Power shapes life, but understanding power gives you leverage. Do you think Trump is more likely to escalate or bluff? Which region worries you most? Iran, Latin America, or the Arctic? Are targeted strikes stabilizing or just kicking the can forward? Subscribe, turn on notifications, and keep learning how geopolitics, economics, and power shape your everyday life. Because the next move rarely announces itself first.